listen, I was about to say, for folks that are familiar with Jeremy, because you're coming from all over the place here.
A little bit.
People that are going to be tuning in over the course of the next little bit here from my feed, from your feed, and there's going to be folks that know you obviously from music, but they're going to know you from the podcast, from the book, from even sports broadcasting. I mean, you've kind of hit it all. And I want to start from the beginning and kind of build it up and kind of hit it over the course of your life, over the course of your career.
Sounds great.
I'll try to be as brief as I can at the beginning, because again, I know the hardcore music folks that certainly know you from Our Lady Peace. They might know this story, but others that don't, just tell me how it all started for you before even getting into the band and cracking through as just a young kid growing up with two musical parents, two musicians in your family, and when you finally got that bug to truly play music and maybe want to do something with it for your life.
Yeah, well, I think as a young drummer, my father was a drummer, played in the Yorkville scene in the 60s and 70s, and it was kind of... I fell in love with the drums just as I was finishing baseball as my other passion, which I worked all the time with my dad. And actually, when I stopped playing baseball and started playing drums, my parents were like mortified. Is it like to the point where like as if I had quit school or something? So it was a quick transition of starting to play drums at 14. I practiced like crazy. I remember rehearsing at Rumblefish Studios in Rexdale, near Woodbine Center, where George Stroumboulopoulos was taking tickets at the theater at the time, right?
Yeah.
But it was just practicing all the time, and I kind of joined the band. I think I was 17, so that curve from practicing all the time to finding a band and then getting signed with OLP. Literally, the month I joined the band, we signed with Sony, and we started writing Naveed and recording Naveed and hit the road. And honestly, it was like that feeling. I kind of grew up from, I guess, a teenager through the eyes of being in a band and touring in a van and just seeing the country and then America and then the world. It was a good trip.
let me back it up a bit here, because I mean, you put it nice. You put it in a nice little capsule there. Mm-hmm. But to go from being a kid with musical parents, not really playing an instrument much, or at least not thinking you were going to do anything with it, mm-hmm. to enjoying sports and just being a kid, to suddenly at 14 saying, all right, now I've got the bug, or now I think I might want to take this seriously. Who knew that 3 years later you'd be in a band and then your life's taking off? But what was it around 13, 14 that made you say, all right, I'm going to focus on music, not baseball. I've got that kind of itch that I want to scratch.
Yeah, it was a desire, an undeniable desire and an ambition, I guess. And I think my dad probably saw that, because I mean his father was a musician, and his father, after, like, it goes back to my great grandfather led the Scottish drum corps in India.
Oh wow.
So it goes back super far, drumming and just kind of the idea of playing drums. So when I started, he kind of saw that ambition and taught me the right things and put me in the right path, but he was very serious about, like, you can't fool around. You have to, like, this is life. You have to, pick your favorite musicians and try and get there. Don't just like say, now I'm in a band and wait for the money and the girls and all that stuff, because that's not how it works.
So at any point when in your earlier years, when you're 8, when you're 10, when you're 12, are you playing drums? Are you playing any instruments, or did it really predominantly just start at 14?
14, literally. Like I found a pair of drumsticks in my back parking lot when I lived in Barrie, and my dad, like, they were literally taped up, like broken drumsticks that I just happened to see on the ground. And I brought them upstairs, and my dad was like, "What are you doing with those things? Get out of here with those." Because he had quit music in the 70s because he just had, 4 kids and couldn't deal with having to pay the bills with music. It was just not a factor or an option. So he saw music as a bad idea. For sure.
It's interesting, you think, as well, at least from the outside looking in. We all, and I'm sure you're going through this, with your own children, I assume, where you want your kids to find their own way in life and find their own passion, but there's still a certain kind of, there's a certain sort of thing in the back of your mind. I know, I'm guilty of it, where if it's, I wish my kid was maybe a little bit more into basketball, or if you're a baseball guy, or if you're a musician, or whether you're a doctor or a lawyer, there's something cool about your kid, boy or girl, following in your footsteps. But at the same time, you also know that other voice, it's kind of on the two shoulders saying, let them be their own kid, let them find their own way. But wouldn't it be cool if they were into what you're into? And for your parents to not push music on you, and for you to find it at such a late age, I think kudos to your parents that they didn't force it upon you.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I felt that baseball had been going on for like 12 years at that point for me, and I was getting sick of it. So I feel like they were kind of maybe pushed me too far into baseball. And when I started music, it was kind of a relief maybe for me, because being lucky enough to have success early with Our Lady Peace, it made it a lot easier for them, because they're like, you can't do this. This is a mistake too. You signed with Sony, and now you have a gold record, and you're touring, and your people are showing up. So it turned into kind of my dad just kind of living his whole life's dream vicariously through me, and my parents just became super fans.
So when you ultimately decide to start playing that at 14, as you mentioned, it's very quick, 3 years later. Did you foresee it? I mean, did you see something even in yourself? And I know it's hard sometimes to judge yourself or to assess yourself, but when you're 14 and a half going on 15, when you're 15 and a half going on 16, do you realize early that, all right, I got something here? I mean, it's kind of crazy to me to think that in 3 years, suddenly you're going from having never played, picking up the sticks for the first time, and 3 years later you go into an audition and you're beating like 100 drummers, and you're suddenly now this 17-year-old prodigy or wonder kid that's now playing for a band that takes off, in this country, let alone in North America and around the globe. That's like, it's kind of strange to think how quickly it happens. Did you feel that inside yourself, that something special was brewing?
Well, I knew I got pretty good fast. You know what I mean? Like, I got the ropes quick.
Yeah.
So I felt like by the time I was 20 or 19, I felt more eager, and I saw the work that I had put into it. So it become, when you work hard enough, even though it was only about 3 or 4 years, I was practicing a lot, and I did accomplish a lot of things. So I was proud of what I had achieved as a craft. So I was always kind of like a working man's drummer in my mind, where I just went in there every day just to try and get a little bit better and a little bit better, and just drive, get out there and drive the band and make everybody feel the pulse of the song.
It's interesting. You talk about how it all started for you, and I know I've said with myself last week. My first guest was Elliot Friedman last Tuesday, and I told the story that night with Elliot, and he's heard it a million times. But had I not graduated coming out of college when I did, second year of the Raptors' existence, at a time when the team's brand new, the sport's brand new, suddenly Headline Sports starts up. So Elliot leaves the radio station, goes on to Headline Sports, and now there's a vacancy. And on top of that, the Fan 590 acquires the rights to the Raptors from CFRB. It's like everything kind of happening at once. And had I graduated a year or two earlier, a year or two later, had Headline Sports not started, it's like you always play that right place, right time. And here you are, 14 years old, 3 years later, you're 17. All of a sudden there's an audition for a band. Boom, you go out for it. Boom, you get it. And life changes like that overnight. It's wild to think how quickly things can change and how quickly things happen in just that little pocket of time.
It is, believe me. And looking back 25 plus years now, it's even more than that. It's just, I felt lucky at the time, but you don't realize, no one should expect that kind of like for example, Clumsy doing so well, and that year the records it sold, and the amount of places we got to play, and the people that came out, and it was just to get to that level where it's almost more like pop music, like Bieber, and because it was like Clumsy and Spice World was like neck and neck on the charts.
Yeah.
So it was not a typical rock and roll band thing or any kind of non-pop thing to be in that, like just for a year and a half to feel that speed and the power of like American radio and just selling that many records. So looking back, I was super lucky. But I think the fact that I was still eager, and every time we achieved something, we always thought we could do better than that in terms of how hard we worked. So everything is kind of expected if you put the effort in,
How tough was it? And I know you've talked about this in other interviews in the past when you're joining a band at 17. And I don't want to get into, whether you could get into bars and all that. I know you've been asked that ad nauseum 1,000 times. But what was it like just being the young guy? And, we often talk about that in pro sports with kids that maybe, when it was allowed to come from high school to the NBA, or young kids and for the first time, no matter what the sport is, where they're maybe living away from home for the first time, or they're now, on the road trying to live the life of a professional athlete, or in your case, obviously a musician, a rock star, and living that life at a young age where just a couple of years ago, let alone a couple of months ago, you were living at home with mom and dad, and suddenly you're now on tour and you're on the road and you got adults all around you and just kind of being thrown into that life.
Yeah, it was great. It's a great way to grow up, man. Like, to be able to be on tour opening for Van Halen at like 19, 20 years old. It was a great experience. Just being a dorky kid that like couldn't talk to girls. I was like happy to be by myself practicing drums all day. To be when you're in a band and there's people running around and it's exciting and fired up, and all of a sudden people want to talk to you. It's interesting to be that, grow up into that. But I think to the point, the fact that it wasn't too excessive, and maybe because I'm a drummer and not a singer, that you kind of can hide behind the drums and lay back and look at it as just like it's an exciting party to be at, and you just kind of stick around.
When you mentioned that early success as well, especially with Naveed and Clumsy and those two albums, do you see that as and I kind of use the phrase again, that pocket in time where the genre in mid to late 90s, the alternative rock, the hard rock, but at the same time, you've got the pop scene that's always been there, present across all decades. But then you've got the hip hop scene that's certainly taking off as well. And it seems like at least for me, and because I lived it, you and I are separated by 5 days in terms of our birthdays. So we're both pretty much the exact same age.
Yeah.
It to me, growing up in the 90s and being in those college years in the 90s in the music scene, there was just so much out there and so much, to me at least, diversity of music that you had people open to wanting to hear a lot of different kinds of music, and it wasn't just the same. And you could be a fan of rap, a fan of rock, a fan of alt rock, whatever it might be, pop as well, because you were getting all of this thrown at you at once because there was so much out there.
Yeah, well, I think if you look at the music industry in 1993 compared to now, in 1993, it was like a 7-lane highway with like alternative and pop and country and heavy rock and metal, and there were just so many different genres that I had radio stations and video stations that played that music, and you could really thrive being on that highway that was existing. And I think towards the end of the 90s, when streaming became a thing and downloading music, that highway went from like 7-8 lanes to 2 lanes.
Yeah.
And it's just pop and hip hop, or pop and rap, and even pop and rap became one thing. So now music is almost like the marketing and the branding that happens with it. It's so much different, and you can kind of have a music career based on just singles now. But I mean, if you're a rock band, if you're still a band, there's like the Arkells are a great example of doing something that the old way that works and making it fresh and kind of bringing it into what's happening today. I mean, they've kind of done it where the Arkells have a rock following, but they also have a pop following. And I think you kind of have to have that to be as successful as they are, especially in Canada. So you really have to kind of be firing on all cylinders in terms of what you are, in terms of marketing, branding, and understanding how to reach people and making an impact every time you open your mouth.
Do you think, and listen, obviously bands today are going through it, they're living it directly, but do you think that it would have helped or hurt you? And when I say you, I'm talking about the band, not necessarily individually, to have social media, to have this sort of connection and interaction back then? I mean, because there's a double-edged sword sometimes with the access that is available to people like me, let alone to fans, whatever it may be, in terms of how close you can get, how close you should get, and how much information people actually want to put out and give to the audience.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's it like I said with branding. I mean, look at people that are on Instagram that have a career based on sponsoring things and taking pictures with stuff. It's that wasn't really an option without the internet as it is today when OLP was first starting out. So the amount of information that you kind of have to know is big in terms. I mean, you have to either have a great manager that understands how to deal with all that stuff and be like a Kurt Cobain type person where you just write incredible music in a room and you record it and people listen to it, or you have to have both, and you see that.
How did that process come together for you guys in the band for OLP in terms of writing the music and then putting words to music and actually creating the songs themselves? What was that process like?
Well, I mean, our best records were when we just sat in a room together and wrote riffs and song ideas, and then just kind of kept a board of ideas, and then melodies would come, and those ideas would become verses, the choruses, and then a verse, and you make it into an actual song, verse, chorus, bridge out, So we would have just that, for example, like Happiness, that record, we were holed up in our rehearsal space in Toronto and just sitting together and playing these ideas over and over and over until they feel like songs. And then I guess towards the end of it, then Rain would take those melodies and start putting lyrics to them.
I always find that fascinating when you listen to, the creative process of, whether it be individuals or bands, that, when they talk about whether the music comes first, the lyrics come first, and just the creation of a song. I find it fascinating for somebody that has zero musical talent at all, never played an instrument in my life, never written a song, obviously, by any means, but it's just, I find it really, really interesting to think of creatively how it comes together, and with, especially with more than one voice in the room, where you can have that collaborative effort and rely on one another and actually be open to ideas, suggestions, and whatnot. Because that's got to be another challenge, I would assume, is somebody getting locked in on one idea of how something should sound, or one idea how a lyric should sound, and not getting sort of locked in on that one thing and not letting it go, and being open to the ideas that, hey, let's do this together.
Well, that's why you have to have the right group of people for a band to make that work. It has to be democratic. If you're making music as a band, sometimes it's just one guy comes in and that's the song. And sometimes Rain would have more concrete ideas, like a verse and a chorus, so it would be closer to a finished thing. But in terms of what worked best for me as a musician was just everybody kind of contributing, and I get, and everybody would be like, for example, as I could in a certain type of style, like half time, double time, triplets, like just to mix up feels, and that everybody was doing that on their own instrument all the time. So I think we took the idea of like if you play a song, say from Clumsy or Naveed, and you pick apart everything, just for example, just the bass should be hooky and the bass should have a feel to it, or the drums should be hooky by themselves and make you feel like it's something that you wouldn't forget. You know what I mean? I say hooky in terms of like it stays in your ear. And that's what we would try to do, compile drums, bass, guitar, and vocals that were all different but succinct together and sounding have its own kind of vibe on its own, live on its own, each part.
Hey, Jeremy, I just want to ask you while we're talking here, a couple of people have mentioned that I might be glitching a little bit. I don't know if that's on my end or your end, but are you hearing me all right and things are going smooth on your end? Just want to make sure.
Yeah, I think
all right,
so.
All right. As long as we're still good. I mean, I'm looking here. I got full bars. I think we're good to go. So hopefully it's just temporary. Hopefully it's something that's not interfering with the conversation. So, I mean, I heard everything you just said. So we'll keep it rolling here.
I think so. I might have to get my charger, but I can hear you, so you can ask a question and I'll grab my charger.
Yeah, no problem. And then appreciate folks that have joined in and watched again as we are here in the second week of the show, and I'm going to keep this thing rolling on Tuesday, Wednesdays, Thursday nights for as long as it may take, and hopefully, knock on wood, we're not locked in this pandemic forever, but again. Hopefully everybody's continuing to practice their social distancing and physical distancing, and we send out a big thanks to all of the frontline workers, the healthcare workers, folks working in the grocery store, et cetera. I know Jeremy echoes those sentiments as well, but I want to make sure that I pass that along because we continue to send our thanks to everybody that's been so incredible.
I think the glitching was my power was low, and every time
there we go.
It's like, so I think that we're good to go again. So yes.
Well, somebody else said it's really echoey in terms of my voice because I'm in my basement. So maybe I need to get I need to turn my basement, Jeremy, into the studio, right? I need to get the egg cartons. I need to get the foam. I need to.
It's echo. Yeah, just like as you can see, I'm right beside the curtain here, so I'm getting the dampness. It's not as echoey. So all you need is a little fabric up around. And
all right, hold on. Let me find some pillows. I just sold some pillows up.
Right?
Well, I'll tell you, it's funny. There's times where, and I should know this, because as much as this is a music thing, part of the reason I'm doing it in the basement, obviously, is because my wife and kid are going to bed at this time. So I'm trying to stay as far away from the upstairs as possible so that I'm not keeping them awake. But when I'm on the road, like whether it be in a hotel room or even sometimes at home, if I have to record either an interview or especially like just a 45-second voice report or a voiceover from television, I literally am in the bed with the blanket and the comforter pulled up over my head, and I'm doing it in the darkness under the sheets because it's the best little sound cave you can have, and just to muffle the sound, and it works perfect. So
for sure,
I'm gonna have to figure something out here for future episodes. So it's not.
You know what? All you need is like a couple hockey sticks with some tape, and just like put a blanket on the side on both sides, and you're done.
All right.
You won't see it, but it'll take care of everything.
All right, I got to jimmy something up here. See, that's now I'm going to get to this a little bit later because I have a couple more music questions I want to ask. But that's a perfect example of Canadianity, right? Like that's
help it out. Couple ski poles, couple hockey sticks.
Yeah, whatever it takes. Probably Hudson Bay blankets or something, right?
Sure.
Yeah. All right, I'm glazing over a ton of stuff, no doubt. I acknowledge that right away.
Yeah.
But how do you go from, or what was the reasoning behind being in a band, having the success you did, being a part of something, and these are your friends, these are your mates for 20 plus years, to all of a sudden say, I'm done? Why?
Well, 21 years has a lot to do with it.
Sure.
I think anybody that does anything for 20 years, especially if you start when you're young, you start thinking about other things and what you can do. And, I have a wife and 3 kids. And when you're in a band, it's live and die by that schedule of that band. And you can't plan 6 months from now. Everything is in erasable ink. And whatever you do plan, the only time that something comes up is on the day that you plan. when you're in a band. Like that's life. So, I mean, that's the kind of the small reason why, it was just time to change and do something else and I guess have a little more control in my life, so yeah.
Was there ever a concern or a fear for you in terms of whether you would keep playing music, never go back to music, still have that creative itch, in terms of it within music, or did you know already that you wanted to do something outside of the music industry?
I just I still play drums, and I'll always be a drummer. I think I've been pretty selective on what I do musically, and that might change in the future. But I've just, like I said, trying to have control with it. You trying to be home more. I'm trying to be with my family, and focusing on other things has been kind of a learning experience in other ways, and I've appreciated that too. And just to kind of look at life differently and have a different perspective and find other ways to feed your family, all that stuff.
Yeah,
is great.
Yeah. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. While you were still playing, before you had made the decision to leave, you were already starting to do, whether it be radio shows, podcasting, kind of branching off, doing your own thing, interviewing people that whether the people you played with or listened to, fans, somebody you were fans of, but it was also branching off, and tell me if I'm wrong, you're into politics and sports and just kind of wide-ranging conversations and interviews, so you were already kind of laying the groundwork for what the future might hold.
Yeah, and I try, when you're doing that stuff, you try different things. That's why I tried, sports broadcasting. I like sports, talking about sports. I like the idea of watching sports and talking about sports with people that are, intellectually understanding to sports. As I'm definitely not the analyst type for sports. I'm more the having a good time while we're watching sports and just kind of commenting on media around the world and how things are through that lens. And I've always been kind of a fan of like the Bob Costas types, where you just kind of see him pop around anywhere, and he still validates himself, because at the end of the day, it's about number one, research and understanding, and having a real understanding of not just the sport but the world, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Is that where your political kind of leanings came as well, in terms of just your interest in your local community, or your provincial community, your national community, or whatever it may be, and how active you've been politically with things over the years as well?
Well, I think if stuff happens, you just get active. Like, I remember you were nice enough to help me out with that the Melancton mega quarry thing years ago, where they were trying to dig 1,000-foot deep quarry and take away our river systems in that area and harness the water and all that stuff. But the only reason I got involved with fighting that was just because that's not only where I grew up, but I just saw that it was the future of Ontario's water was at stake, and it was going to Americans and being sold, in my mind, eventually. So I just was like, what the hell's going on? I'm going to try and fight this. And that's why I got active in that. But I think everybody should have their ear to the ground in their community. And if something strikes them personally, then they should be active on trying to make it, to better it, you know?
Have you ever had to kind of have that internal battle with yourself in terms of whether you should or shouldn't say something, do something, act because of your platform? You know, you get that conversation or that question a lot where, you know, you'll hear people say, oh, you know, and trust me, I'm not trying to patronize you by saying celebrities, should celebrities be involved? Should they be, you know? But to me, it's, hey, if you have a voice and your voice just happens to be maybe a little bit bigger, a little bit louder, the platform that is, I'm using the metaphor here, why wouldn't you, or why shouldn't you use it to help draw attention to issues and matters that really could have an impact?
Yeah, well, it's a double-edged sword, right? Because I believe in, you know, standing behind things that you believe in and speaking your mind if something's upset. And whether it's personal stuff with like my kids in school and the teacher strike, or whatever it is, like it's stuff that affects me personally. So I feel like I can talk about it. So, but at the same time, sometimes I'll tweet something and I'll just erase it and it's just not tweet it, because I realize like I want to say this, but I also think about the person that will take it the wrong way, what I'm trying to say, and disregard it. And then that's a lose-lose, you know what I mean? Or if I say it and someone does agree with it, but it is maybe too far one way, it'll just change perspective. And I think I've met people that like actually get upset when you swear, like if you throw an F-bomb, it kind of hurts their feelings. And I'm like, I personally don't understand that, but I'm like, after a while on Twitter, I'm like, well, I think, that there is a reason, and I should respect that type of person who like really is offended just by a word,
Yeah.
So I stopped swearing on Twitter, and I have a little bit more of a filter just on that regard of like, I want to say certain things, but sometimes people take it the wrong way. And other times the deluge of false information that comes to try and, talk against my point makes it pointless to begin with. So it's like you start a fight for no reason too. So I really pick my spots these days to say and what not to say. But it's difficult to sometimes to voice a simple thing with how divided some people are these days.
It's interesting you mentioned that as well, because, I'll admit that, I give you credit. If you have that filter where you are writing something and actually proofing it and reading it before you hit send, that's a win in itself. That's a win in itself, because, we could probably...
but you should read what I'm not sending. You'd be like, I definitely wouldn't send that either.
Well, hey, I think there's a certain president that could probably learn from that, but we'll leave that one alone, maybe. But what I find difficult is, and I'm going to bring this back and maybe tie it into music to some degree as well. So pardon me if I go off on a little tangent here.
But it's all about tangents.
With what I do, at least, I'm not going on the Fan 590 or on SportsCenter or whatever and dropping F-bombs or swearing or cursing or whatever else. So to me, what I'm doing then, representing myself on social media, as much as it's me and it's who I am and what I'm doing right now. It's like I'm not wearing a shirt and tie right now. We're just hanging out, two guys, talking back and forth. But because I still represent the professional side of me, the companies I work for, I'm not going to curse and swear. But then there's another side that says, and you'll get the critics that say, well, hold on a second. Are you being real? And that word gets thrown around. Are you being real? Are you being your true self? Because listen, I'm no choir boy. As soon as if you and I were not on camera right now, and we're watching a game in the basement or whatever, am I going to be cursing and swearing a little bit? Sure. Who doesn't, But there's the professional side, and then there's the personal side. And I think that kind of, to draw it into the music, I always got, I don't know if this is a fair comparison here. Maybe I'm not talking, comparisons. Maybe it's apples and oranges. But it always used to bother me as even just a fan. Again, no musical inclination at all. It bothered me when I would hear people talk about bands, oh, you sold out. Who wanted to play in their basement for the rest of their lives? Who wanted to play in their garage the rest of their lives? You play music because you want your music to get out to people. You want people to listen. You want to be popular. You want people to come to your shows. You want people to hear your lyrics.